Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menashe. Today is another AMA episode. That is, Ask Me Anything. I love to answer your questions, and if you have a question you think is going to be of broad interest, send it in. I'll answer it live on the air. Send your questions to victor@victorjm.com. That's victor@victorjm.com. Today's question comes from Mark, who writes, even when the city says they encourage development in specific zones, in our case, an industrial corridor, the bureaucrats who are responsible for the approvals can still erect significant roadblocks. When do you decide that the juice is not worth the squeeze? Well, Mark, this is a great question, and there's no question that this can be one of the biggest disconnects in development. A city can be pro-development at the policy level and still appear to be anti-development at the counter level. The council may want housing, or in your case, industrial. They may want jobs, a tax base, revitalization, but the planner, the traffic engineer, the fire marshal, the plans examiner, the stormwater consultant, the design committee, all these other stakeholders can have the effect of veto power. And that's why I would never underwrite a project based only on what the zoning map says. I really want to understand the lay of the land, understand the culture associated with the approval. It comes down to 4 tests. Is there an objection, and is it technical, is it political, or is it personal? Technical objections can usually be solved, whether it's with a traffic study, a stormwater management redesign, utility easements, maybe a fire access issue. These are all legal policy questions. Sometimes they can be painful, but they are solvable. You price it, you schedule it, you decide whether the project still works or not. Political objections are more dangerous. If the staff is nervous because council is split, because neighbors are organized, or the mayor doesn't want controversy before an election, the process becomes less predictable. Doesn't mean you walk away, but you need a political strategy, not just an engineering response. And then it comes down to personal or cultural obstruction. That's the worst. If the reviewer simply does not want the project, they keep moving the goalposts. They refuse to put comments in writing or reopen issues that were previously resolved. You're no longer in a normal approval process. You're in a discretionary negotiation with someone who may not be accountable to the economics of the project. And that's when I would be very cautious. I'm thinking specifically of a bureaucrat that worked for a city, not my home city, where one of the staff members in the zoning office happened to back on a particular property and they didn't want to see that property developed. It was clearly a conflict of interest, and they obstructed the development process. So this is where it's important, where you need to define the path to approval and get it in writing. And before you spend money, you want to see that written path. I would ask, what are the remaining approval conditions? Who owns each one of them, and what's the standard for approval? And when will the city confirm that condition satisfied? If they cannot or will not answer that, then there is risk. The risk is not the answer. The risk is in the absence of a finish line. A hard no is often better than an endless maybe. You need to assess what's your monthly burn and the opportunity cost. If you've leveraged the land and you've got high carrying costs, you've got consulting fees, legal fees, time that's been invested, additional fees to extend the debt, property taxes. All of these things are silent killers. And then, of course, there's the opportunity cost, where you might be putting your time and energy into something that's going to yield better results. And this is where you want to start to assess how many more months can a project absorb before investor returns drop below your minimum threshold. If the project only works with the best case approval timeline, it may not work in reality. Does the approved project still resemble a project that you underwrote at the beginning? And that's where a lot of developers get trapped. You start with a viable project, then the city asks for more landscaping, maybe a traffic study, maybe a new intersection, traffic signals, sewer lift station. All of these different things can come into play. Individually, each request sounds reasonable. Collectively, they destroy the deal. So the question is not, can it get approved? The question is, can it get approved on terms that still preserve the business case? I would seriously consider walking away, pausing, or renegotiating the land if any of these are true. The city will not put the requirements in writing, or number 2, the approval timeline has slipped more than 50% from the original outside estimate with no clear path to resolution. Sometimes the required concessions reduce the density or revenue by more than the project's profit. I would definitely kill it if the project's offsite improvements become open-ended. If there are different departments giving conflicting requirements and there's no senior official who's going to resolve the conflict. You might consider killing it if the project requires repeated discretionary approvals instead of objective code compliance. And you certainly want to reconsider if you're spending money just to keep hope alive rather than advancing the project towards a defined approval. That last one is important. Hope is not a strategy. In development, hope is usually expensive. So what would I do before walking away? Well, before I kill a project, I would try at least 3 things. First, request senior level alignment meetings with planning, with engineering, with fire, utilities. The purpose is to force coordination. You want to get all of those folks in the same room. Second, you want to produce a written approval matrix. List every open item, every responsible party, what the required actions are, the target dates, and the consequence if unresolved. And then third, reframe the project in terms that the city cares about, in terms of tax base, housing supply, job creation, infrastructure improvement. Maybe it's removal of blight, it might be public safety, or economic development. Staff often responds better when the project is connected to an adopted public objective. Often the mayor's office will have staff members whose job it is to solve problems. I would definitely get in touch with those staff members and see what influence they can bring to bear on resolving the issue. If that still doesn't work, create a predictable path, then at that point you have your answer. So on future deals, I would definitely assign each municipality an approval risk premium. A city with predictable staff, with objective standards, and a time-bounded approval path might justify one land price. A city with political discretion, with hostile departments, and maybe a 24 or 48-month approval path deserves a materially lower land price, a longer due diligence, and seller financing. Absolutely do not pay the price of entitled land for land that still has bureaucratic risk. That's the real lesson. The city might say, "We encourage development, but your response should be awesome. Show me the process, the timeline, and the standards," and the people who are empowered to say yes. If they can't do that, the zoning designation is not an entitlement. It's a marketing brochure. I want to thank you, Mark, for a fabulous question. And for the listeners at home, have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen. And we'll talk to you again tomorrow.